All right, boys and girls, we are on to chapter 17, Cook, Cat, and Coffin. And here is an image for you. And as I was reading the last chapter and looking at how different Harvey and Wendell's reactions are to coming back to the holiday house, I thought it was important to compare and contrast Harvey and Wendell's character traits, because I'm thinking the author has a purpose for having a character like Harvey and a character like Wendell. So what can we realize? What might the author be trying to teach us by having these two different characters? If you're familiar with the expression round or flat character, how would you classify Harvey and Wendell? Are they round characters that evolve and change, or are they flat? They stay kind of the same the whole way through the story. Those are some things to consider as I read chapter 17. Great to have you boys back, Rictus said, his smile as wide as ever. I told everyone you wouldn't be able to stay away. Nobody believed me. He's gone, they said. He's gone. But I knew better. He started to wander toward Harvey. I knew you wouldn't be satisfied with a little visit, not with so much fun still to be had. I'm hungry, Wendell whined. Help yourselves, Rictus grinned. Wendell was off at a sprint into the kitchen. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, he hollered. Look at all this food. Harvey didn't reply. Aren't you hungry? Rictus said, raising his eyebrow high above his spectacles. He cupped his hand behind his ear. That sounds like an empty belly to me. Where's Miss Griffin? Harvey said. Oh, she's around, Rictus said mischievously, but she's getting old. She takes to her bed a good deal these days, so we laid her down somewhere safe and sound. As he spoke, there was a mewling sound from the living room, and there, at the door, stood Stew Cat. Rictus scowled. Get out of here, pussy, he spat. Can you see we're having a conversation? But Stew Cat wasn't about to be intimidated. She sauntered over to Harvey, rubbing herself against his legs. What do you want? Harvey said, going down on his haunches to stroke her. She purred loudly. Hey, that's fine and dandy, Rictus said, putting off his anger in favor of a freshly polished smile. You like the cat? Cat likes you. Everybody's happy. I'm not happy, Harvey said. And why's that? I left all my presents here and I don't know where. No problem, said Rictus. I'll find them for you. Would you do that? Harvey said. Sure, kid, said Rictus, persuaded that his charm was working again. That's what we're all here for, to give you whatever your heart desires. I think maybe I left them up in my bedroom, Harvey suggested. You know, I think I saw him up there, Rictus replied. You stay right here. I'll be back. He took himself up the stairs 2 and 3 at a time, whistling tunelessly through his teeth as he ascended. Harvey waited until he had disappeared from sight and then went to check on Wendell, letting Stew Cat slip away. Ah, now look at this, a voice said as he appeared at the kitchen door. It was Jive. He was standing at the stove, as sinewy as ever, juggling eggs with one hand and tossing pancakes in a pan with the other. What do you fancy? He said. Sweet or savory? Nothing, Harvey said. It's all good, Wendell piped up. He was almost hidden behind a wall of filled plates. Try the apple turnovers. They're great. Harvey was sorely tempted. The buffet looked wonderfully tempting, but it was dust. He had to keep remembering that. Maybe later, he said, averting his eyes from the heaps of syrup-drenched waffles and bowls of ice cream. Where are you going? Jive wanted to know. Mr. Rictus is finding a few presents for me, Harvey said. Jive smiled with satisfaction. So you're getting back into the swing of things, kiddo, he said. Good for you. I've missed being here, Harvey replied. He didn't linger, just in case Jive saw the lie in his eyes, but turned and headed back into the hallway. Stew Cat was still there, staring at him. What is it? He said. The cat took off toward the stairs, then stopped and cast a backward glance. Have you something to show me? Harvey whispered. At this, the cat bounded off again. Harvey followed, expecting her to lead the way upstairs. But before she reached the bottom step, she veered off to the left and led Harvey down a narrow passage to a door he had never even noticed before. He rattled the handle, but the door was locked. Turning to look for Stew Cat, he found her rubbing her arched back against the leg of a small table set nearby. On the table was a carved wooden box. In the box was a key. He went back to the door, unlocked it, and pulled it open. There was a flight of wooden steps in front of him, leading down into the darkness from which a sour, dank smell rose. He might have declined to descend had Stu-Cat not hurried on past him down into the murk. With his fingers trailing on the damp walls to the left and right of him, he followed Stu-Cat to the bottom of the flight, counted the steps as he went. There were 52, and by the time he had descended them all, his eyes had become reasonably accustomed to the gloom. The cellar was cavernous but empty, except for a litter of rubble and a large wooden box, which lay in the dust maybe a dozen yards from where he stood. "What is it?" he hissed to Stu-Cat, knowing the creature had no way of replying, but hoping for some sign, nevertheless. Stu-Cat's only answer was to run across the floor and leap nimbly onto the box, where it began to claw at the wood. Harvey's curiosity was stronger than his fear, but not so much stronger that he dashed to pull off the lid. He approached as though the box were some sleeping beast, which for all he knew it was. The closer he got, the more it resembled a crude coffin. But what kind of coffin was sealed with a padlock? Was this where Karna had been laid, perhaps, after the beast had dragged its wounded body back home? Was it even now listening to Stu-Cat scratch on the lid, waiting for release? As he came within a yard of the casket, however, he laid eyes on a clue to its contents. An apron string left hanging out of the box by whoever had locked it. He knew only one person in the house who ever wore an apron. "Mrs. Griffin," he whispered, digging his fingernail under the lid. "Mrs. Griffin, are you in there?" There was a muffled thump from inside. "I'm going to get you out," he promised, hauling on the lid as hard as he could. He didn't have the strength to break the lock. In desperation, he began to search the cellar, looking for some tool or other, and found himself 2 sizable rocks. Hefting them, he returned to the casket. "This is going to be noisy," he warned Mrs. Griffin. Then, using one stone as a kind of chisel and the other as a hammer, he assaulted the lock. Blue sparks flew as he struck the metal, but he seemed to be making no impression until all of a sudden the lock gave a loud crack and fell to the ground. He paused for a moment, a feather of doubt bursting his brow. Suppose it was Karna's coffin. Then he threw the rock aside and hauled off the lid. Okay, so again, what do you notice between the character Harvey and the character Wendell? And I know there's so much more to think about. The description of how Harvey found that coffin, and also just what's going on with Miss Griffin. So I hope that makes you think and wonder till we approach chapter 18 and learn more. Bye, boys and girls.